What if Hollywood's biggest disasters were already doomed before the first ticket was sold? These were not tiny experiments or low-budget risks. These were million-dollar monsters backed by famous stars, giant studios, and marketing machines that promised domination. But from day one, audiences rejected them. Critics smelled blood, and the box office turned into a crime scene. And the deeper this list goes, the more shocking the losses become. Mickey 17, 2025. A movie from an Oscar-winning director should not feel like a warning label, but Mickey 17 arrived with that strange cloud hanging over it. On paper, this was the kind of project studios claim they want: bold sci-fi, a respected filmmaker, a major star, dark humor, and a concept weird enough to stand out in a marketplace full of sequels. Bong Joon-ho had already conquered international cinema with Parasite, and Robert Pattinson had rebuilt himself as one of the most interesting leading men of his generation. So why did this expensive sci-fi gamble feel nervous before audiences even sat down? The answer is that Mickey 17 looked brilliant, but also difficult to sell. It was not simple superhero sci-fi. It was not comfort food. It was strange, satirical, icy, and high concept. The kind of movie critics might admire, but casual moviegoers might postpone. That is deadly when the budget is huge. A film like this needs curiosity to become urgency, and urgency never fully arrived. Its opening suggested that audiences respected the names involved more than they actually rushed to buy tickets. That makes Mickey 17 a fascinating flop, because it was not a lazy movie. It was a risky one. But Hollywood keeps forgetting one brutal rule: prestige does not automatically become profit. Sometimes the smartest movie in the room still loses the room. Snow White, 2025. Disney did not just remake a classic here. It walked directly into a cultural storm with a price tag too large to ignore. Snow White should have been one of the safest brands in the world. The original animated film was not just another Disney title. It was a foundation stone of the entire studio mythology. A live-action version should have been easy money, at least in theory. Nostalgia, music, fairy tale imagery, and a globally recognizable princess all seemed like powerful ingredients. But from the beginning, this remake carried a strange tension. The problem was not simply that audiences were tired of remakes. The problem was that this particular remake became a debate before it became a movie. Online arguments, casting controversies, creative changes, and the larger fatigue around Disney's live-action strategy all collided before opening weekend. Instead of feeling magical, the movie felt like homework in a culture war. And when a film costs hundreds of millions, even a decent opening can look weak if the public conversation is already poisoned. Snow White fits this list because it shows how dangerous brand confidence can become. Disney had the name, the history, and the machinery. But audiences no longer treat nostalgia as a guarantee. If the emotional trust is broken before day one, even a fairy tale can open like a financial nightmare. Elio, 2025. Pixar once made original animation feel unstoppable, but Elio proved even that famous lamp can flicker at the box office. This was not a cheap little experiment tossed into theaters. It was a glossy, heartfelt, space-themed animated adventure from a studio that built its reputation on emotional universality. The premise had real promise. A young outsider accidentally becomes Earth's representative in an intergalactic community. That sounds colorful, funny, and deeply Pixar, but the opening told a harsher story. Elio arrived in a very different world from the one that made Pixar nearly unbeatable. Families had been trained to wait for streaming. Original animated films had become harder to launch. And unless a movie felt like an immediate cultural event, parents could easily decide to save the trip, skip the tickets, and wait. That shift is devastating for a big-budget animated film, because animation spends years and mountains of money before it ever asks the audience for a weekend. What makes Elio especially painful is that it represents more than one movie underperforming. It signals a broader problem for original family films. Pixar used to sell audiences on trust alone. Now even Pixar has to fight for urgency. Elio did not flop because imagination disappeared. It flopped because modern moviegoers are harder to move from the couch than ever. Tron Aries, 2025. A glowing neon world should have looked like the future, but Tron Aries reminded Hollywood that cult loyalty is not the same as mass demand. The Tron name carries style, history, and a very specific kind of cool. Since the original film, the franchise has been associated with digital dreams, sleek visuals, electronic atmosphere, and a strange fascination with technology before technology fully took over daily life. So a new Tron sequel with a massive budget sounded like a studio trying to revive a sleeping giant. But that is where the risk begins. Tron has always been visually iconic, but it has never been a guaranteed box office monster. It is the kind of franchise people admire, reference, and celebrate online. But admiration does not always translate into millions of ticket buyers on opening weekend. When a movie costs around blockbuster money, it cannot survive on cult affection alone. It needs families, casual viewers, repeat business, and a sense that missing it in theaters would be a mistake. Tron Aries struggled because the brand was famous without being urgent. Audiences knew the name, but many did not feel emotionally attached enough to rush out immediately. That makes it a perfect day-one flop story. Hollywood saw a legacy brand. The audience saw another expensive sequel asking for attention in an already crowded future. The Lone Ranger, 2013. This was supposed to be Pirates of the Caribbean in the desert. Instead, it became a warning sign written in dust. The Lone Ranger had everything studios usually believe can manufacture a hit: a beloved old property, a huge budget, spectacular action, a major star, and the team behind one of Disney's biggest live-action franchises. On paper, it looked like a summer event. In reality, it opened like audiences had already decided the movie was too strange, too expensive, and too late. The issue was not only the budget, though that number made every weakness look worse. The bigger problem was tone. The Lone Ranger could not decide whether it wanted to be a sincere Western, a goofy buddy adventure, a dark revenge story, or a giant theme park spectacle. That kind of confusion is dangerous in marketing because audiences need a clear reason to show up. Instead, many viewers looked at the trailers and asked a fatal question: who exactly is this for? When the opening weekend failed to justify the enormous cost, the conversation quickly turned from adventure to embarrassment. The Lone Ranger became a case study in franchise thinking gone wrong. Disney tried to turn an old masked hero into a modern blockbuster machine, but audiences never bought the illusion. Big hat, big train, big budget, and a painfully small payoff. John Carter, 2012. Some movies fail because they look small. John Carter failed because it looked enormous and still somehow invisible. Disney had a massive sci-fi adventure on its hands, based on a classic character that helped inspire generations of space fantasy. There were alien kingdoms, desert battles, flying machines, strange creatures, and a hero designed to launch an entire franchise. But when the movie arrived, the public reaction was not excitement. It was confusion. The biggest problem was branding. The title John Carter sounded plain, almost empty, when the film itself was supposed to be a sweeping interplanetary epic. Many casual viewers had no idea what it was selling. Was it a Western? A superhero story? A Mars adventure? A fantasy war movie? That uncertainty killed urgency before opening weekend even began. For a film with a giant budget, confusion is poison. The tragedy is that John Carter was not some careless disaster. It had scale, imagination, and a pulpy old-school spirit. But Hollywood learned the wrong lesson from its own ambition. You cannot spend your way out of weak marketing. If audiences do not understand why they should care on day one, even a planet-sized adventure can crash before liftoff. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, 2001. This movie tried to drag cinema into the digital future, but the future refused to buy a ticket. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within was not just another video game adaptation. It was a technological gamble, a near photorealistic CGI feature that wanted to prove computer-generated actors could carry serious emotional drama. At the time, that sounded revolutionary. The problem was that audiences did not know whether they were watching a movie, a tech demo, or a very expensive experiment. The Final Fantasy name gave it built-in recognition, but that recognition also created pressure. Fans expected something connected to the games they loved, while mainstream viewers were asked to care about a strange sci-fi story filled with digital characters who looked impressive but emotionally distant. That gap became fatal. The movie was expensive, ambitious, and visually ahead of its moment, but it opened without the kind of mass enthusiasm needed to justify its cost. What makes this flop so fascinating is that it was not lazy. It was brave, maybe too brave. The film was chasing tomorrow before audiences were ready to follow. In the end, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within became a warning from the early CGI era. Technology can amaze people, but it cannot replace emotional connection. Cutthroat Island, 1995. Before pirates became billion-dollar entertainment, Cutthroat Island nearly made Hollywood afraid of them forever. This was meant to be a grand, swashbuckling adventure filled with ships, sword fights, explosions, treasure, and old-fashioned movie spectacle. Instead, it became one of the most infamous box office disasters of the 1990s. The kind of flop people still mention whenever Hollywood spends too much money chasing a genre the audience has already abandoned. The production carried the smell of trouble before release. The budget ballooned, the pirate genre was considered commercially risky, and the marketing never convinced modern audiences that they needed a massive throwback adventure. By the time Cutthroat Island reached theaters, it felt less like an exciting event and more like a very expensive ship sailing into bad weather. The opening was weak, the reviews were rough, and the financial damage became legendary. Its failure was so loud that pirate movies became radioactive for years, until Pirates of the Caribbean later proved the genre could work with the right tone, star power, and timing. But that only makes Cutthroat Island look even more painful. It had the cannons, the costumes, and the treasure map. What it did not have was audience trust, and without that, the whole ship sank fast. Mars Needs Moms, 2011. A family movie should not become a financial horror story, but Mars Needs Moms turned animation into a cautionary tale. Disney released it with the confidence of a big studio, backed by expensive motion capture technology and a concept that seemed simple enough for kids. A boy travels to Mars to rescue his mother. On paper, it had adventure, emotion, comedy, and sci-fi visuals. But from day one, audiences stayed away in shocking numbers. The problem was that the movie looked oddly uncomfortable. Its motion capture animation sat in that strange middle ground where characters felt too realistic to be charming and too artificial to feel alive. For family audiences, that is dangerous. Parents and children connect quickly to warmth, color, and personality. Mars Needs Moms instead carried a chilly, uncanny quality that made the emotional story harder to embrace. Even worse, the marketing did not make it feel like an unmissable family event. The opening weekend was brutal, and the losses became infamous almost immediately. It was not simply a flop. It was the kind of flop that made studios reconsider entire animation strategies. Mars Needs Moms proved that expensive technology does not automatically create wonder. Sometimes the more money Hollywood spends trying to manufacture emotion, the more lifeless the result can feel. Mortal Engines, 2018. A City on Wheels should have been impossible to ignore, but Mortal Engines rolled into theaters and barely made a sound. Produced with blockbuster scale and tied to the name of Peter Jackson, the film looked like it wanted to become the next giant fantasy franchise. Its world was strange and visually bold. Massive mobile cities hunting smaller towns across a ruined future Earth. That idea alone should have been enough to spark curiosity. But curiosity is not the same as commitment. Mortal Engines had the problem many expensive world-building movies face. It looked huge, but unfamiliar. Audiences were being asked to learn new rules, new politics, new characters, and a new mythology, all without the safety net of a globally beloved brand. In a market crowded with superheroes, sequels, and recognizable franchises, that was a dangerous ask. The trailers showed spectacle, but they did not create emotional urgency. When the film opened weekly, the dream of a franchise disappeared almost instantly. What makes Mortal Engines especially painful is that it had real visual ambition. It did not look cheap or lazy. It looked like a studio betting big on imagination. But audiences did not reward that bet. In the end, the moving cities were massive. The box office was not. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, 2017. Warner Brothers wanted a sword, a throne, and a billion-dollar universe. But King Arthur, Legend of the Sword could barely survive its first battle. This was not designed as a one-off medieval adventure. It was meant to relaunch King Arthur for the blockbuster age, with Guy Ritchie's fast-cut style, Charlie Hunnam as a streetwise hero, giant creatures, magical battles, and enough mythology to suggest sequels were already being imagined behind studio doors. The problem was that audiences never treated it like an event. From day one, the movie felt caught between too many identities. It wanted to be gritty, funny, epic, modern, mythic, and franchise-ready all at once. Instead of making Arthur feel timeless, the marketing made him feel strangely manufactured. Viewers did not reject the legend itself. They rejected the feeling that Hollywood was trying too hard to turn ancient mythology into another cinematic universe. That made the opening especially painful. With a huge budget and massive expectations, the film needed immediate momentum. Instead, it stumbled fast, and the franchise dream vanished almost overnight. King Arthur. Legend of the Sword proves that even one of the most famous legends in Western storytelling cannot save a movie if audiences smell desperation. The sword was powerful. The box office was not. The Adventures of Pluto Nash, 2002. This was not just a flop. It was the kind of movie Hollywood still whispers about when a comedy budget gets too high. The Adventures of Pluto Nash starred Eddie Murphy at a time when his name still meant serious commercial power, and the idea sounded wild enough to stand out. A futuristic moon-based crime comedy with casinos, gangsters, clones, and space-age chaos. But the problem was obvious almost immediately. Nobody seemed to know what this movie was supposed to be. Was it a family comedy, a sci-fi spoof, a gangster parody, a futuristic action film? The trailers could not sell a clear identity, and audiences responded with silence. That silence became brutal when measured against the reported cost. A movie with that kind of budget cannot afford curiosity that feels confused. It needs excitement. Pluto Nash opened weekly, disappeared quickly, and became one of the most famous financial disasters of the early 2000s. What makes it so damaging is that Eddie Murphy had survived bad reviews before. Stars can recover from weak movies. But this one became a punchline because the gap between cost and audience interest was almost unbelievable. The Adventures of Pluto Nash is the perfect day-one disaster. Expensive, overbuilt, instantly rejected, and remembered less as a movie than as a Hollywood caution sign. The Flash, 2023. A superhero movie with decades of comic book history should not open like a warning sign, but The Flash became one of the loudest alarms in modern franchise Hollywood. Warner Brothers positioned it as a massive DC event. Multiverse chaos, returning Batman nostalgia, emotional time travel stakes, and enough spectacle to suggest the studio believed it had something huge. But from day one, the gap between hype and audience turnout was impossible to ignore. The problem was bigger than one movie. The DC brand was already unstable. The old cinematic universe was being reset, and audiences seemed unsure whether The Flash even mattered to the future. That uncertainty is deadly for a blockbuster. Why rush to theaters for a major event if the event already feels disconnected from what comes next? Add mixed word of mouth, online controversy, and superhero fatigue, and the movie's opening quickly turned from hopeful to humiliating. What makes The Flash fit this list so strongly is the scale of expectation. It was not a small experiment. It was a franchise centerpiece built to generate excitement, nostalgia, and box office heat. Instead, it became proof that even superheroes can collapse when audiences sense a studio no longer knows where its own universe is going. The 13th Warrior, 1999. A Viking adventure with a major star should have charged into theaters like a battle cry. Instead, the 13th Warrior arrived sounding more like an alarm bell. This film had the ingredients of a rugged late 90s spectacle. Antonio Banderas, ancient warriors, violent mystery, sweeping locations, and a story loosely rooted in Michael Crichton's famous blend of history and myth. On paper, that should have created intrigue. But behind the scenes, the movie became a costly struggle long before audiences judged it. The production was troubled, expensive, delayed, and reportedly reshaped after creative disagreements. That kind of baggage matters because it can drain a movie's confidence before release. By the time The 13th Warrior reached theaters, it no longer felt like a sharp, fresh adventure. It felt like a project the studio was trying to push across the finish line. Audiences sensed the uncertainty, and the opening did not deliver the rescue the film needed. What makes this flop so memorable is that the movie later gained defenders who appreciated its atmosphere, brutality, and old-school adventure spirit. But box office history is not written by later cult appreciation. It is written by opening weekends, expectations, and costs. The 13th Warrior may have had swords, fire, and warriors in the mist, but financially, it lost the battle almost immediately. Heaven's Gate, 1980. This is the movie that did not merely flop, it became a Hollywood crime scene. Heaven's Gate was supposed to be a grand artistic western from Michael Cimino, the director who had just won enormous prestige after The Deer Hunter. That success gave him rare power, and the film became a symbol of unchecked creative freedom. Huge sets, endless takes, a ballooning budget, and a production that seemed to grow more legendary with every delay. When it finally premiered, the reaction was catastrophic. Critics attacked it, audiences stayed away, and the studio quickly pulled it from release before trying again with a shorter version. But the damage had already been done. Heaven's Gate became more than a failed Western. It became a symbol of Hollywood excess, the moment studios looked at director-driven ambition and decided control had to come back with force. Its box office was tiny compared with its cost, but its cultural impact was enormous. That is why it deserves number 1. Many movies lose money. Many embarrass studios. But Heaven's Gate changed the conversation around power in Hollywood. It warned executives what could happen when prestige, ego, and money collided without restraint. The movie was meant to be a masterpiece. Instead, it became the most famous cautionary tale ever projected onto a screen. Hollywood loves to pretend every disaster is just bad timing, but these movies prove something darker. Sometimes the audience knows the truth on day one. Huge budgets, famous names, and giant marketing campaigns cannot save a film people simply do not want. Which flop shocked you the most? Drop it below and subscribe for more movie disasters. Hollywood wishes we forgot.